It's funny, this should be happening on St. Paddy's Day, right? I thought we should chase the snakes out of Canada. See, this is why he chased them out of Ireland. Well, guys, it looks like it's just us this morning. We don't have internet, we don't have camera.
No, you have internet.
We've got internet, okay. So everyone can still, okay, good. So apparently there's a problem with the cameras when they set it up in a certain way on Sunday. So I've selected 3 hymns for us. I think there's one that I'm missing. Kelly,
Yes, sir.
can you access the PowerPoint, just see what the hymn after Be Thou My Vision is? Yeah, the classical hymn for the 18th century. Okay, so the first one's Be Thou My Vision. Then I talk about the classical organ.
Come now, Almighty King.
Thank you. That's the one I forgot. Okay, we've got 4 hymns. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're starting really late. Sorry about that. Got some technical issues with our PowerPoint. And I had some lovely photos to show you. So I will describe what I had in the photos because it's really, really, really fascinating stuff. So we kick off this morning. Remember last time we spoke about the ancient history from the very first instrument that looked like a pipe organ coming from Ctesibius, way back in BC times in Alexandria. This was during the time when Greece was in control over ancient Egypt, the Ptolemaic period. So we moved there through the Roman water organ, all the way through the Baroque, which is the Bach-Handel period, right? So now we're going into the classical era. So we're coming into the Mozart time, okay, the classical, the 18th century. So as some of you probably know, probably not everybody, is that music styles and genres are all broken up into epochs, okay? So we had the medieval, Middle Ages, we had the Renaissance, we had the Baroque. Now we're going into the classical, the Romantic period. Now people always think from the Romantic period that all the music is romantic. Well, not necessarily so. Okay, it was called the Romantic period because the musicians were being inspired by stories and mythology from the past. There were poets like Goethe who were writing about the elf king and the fairies and all this kind of stuff was going on. The interest in the ancient gods was coming back. So now we have things like the ring cycle, you know, the ancient German mythology was coming back into opera. So we have Wagner and the ring cycle and the Valkyries and so on and so forth. So that's why it was called the Romantic period, because it was all this fantasy was starting to come into the art, into the liturgy and into music as well with grand operas and things. And then we're going to move into the 20th century, which I term the modern era with regards to the history of the pipe organ in particular. So when we go to the classical period around about Mozart's time, this is the 1700s. Okay, now there is no distinct, okay, this period stops right there. And at the stroke of midnight and New Year's, now it's another epoch. It all kind of blends, kind of like a watercolor. Okay, so Baroque music was still very popular in the 1700s, and there were echoes of what people could call classical era type music starting already in the 1600s. So it's kind of like muddy areas, okay? And remember, even to this day, people are still listening to Renaissance and Baroque and classical music. So it's not like, oh, okay, that was from the past, so burn all the books. We're not going to play any more Baroque music. We're now in the 20th century. So there's always a lot of muddying going on. Also, bear in mind that in all different eras, there were composers who would mimic, imitate, or reproduce music from other eras. This is where a lot of muddy water and a lot of, it looks like the PowerPoint's coming on, yay! This is where a lot of confusion can happen, because you can have somebody from 19-something or the 20s who will compose a piece that is meant to imitate a Renaissance piece. I'm busy writing some stuff right now for a professional level quartet that I'm involved in. And we're starting to look at motets from the Renaissance period, some Gregorian, and all that kind of stuff. So right now, I'm actually composing a mass for peace, because of what's going on in Europe, where I have, thank you, Pastor Willem, wow. He got it up and running, thank God. Okay, so I guess we can go right to the very beginning, Kels, thank you. There we go. So this is the classical period. Now I can share the beautiful pictures with you. Okay. So just remember, nothing is always clear-cut with specific boundaries. There's muddying over, there's carryovers going on. Okay, one of the problems in the 18th century, in the 1700s, is development, invention, and expansion of the organ as it was in the Baroque didn't happen. This is a very, very strange thing, but there was a hiatus where essentially any organs that were being built in the 18th century were essentially Baroque in style. Okay, there's really, really very little distinction between a Baroque pipe organ and a classical. Okay, there was sort of just this, yeah, the organ, it belongs in church. So there was no noticeable big developments during that time. Here and there, a little spark was happening. The English were starting to use the swell box with the shutters a lot. In previous research I had done with the Baroque organ, there was a feeling that the French actually created the first swell box, or they created something like it. But the swell box, as what appears today on pipe organs, was actually an English invention. So no notable developments really, essentially carry over of the Baroque organ into that period. This is the Georgian period in English history, with King George I. So the Georgian period, they loved their organs. They were being built everywhere. Every tiny little chapel and even little country village church had to have a pipe organ. It was just a status symbol. It was like they just simply had to have one, no matter how big or how small. And usually they were quite small. Lovely, cute instruments, limited, yes. As a modern 21st century organist, to go and sit and play these little village organs is like, oh my, there's only one keyboard and there's only like 5 stops. But they have a special character of their own. During this period, English organs still lacked pedals. Pedals came very late. If they did appear in larger instruments, they were usually short little stubby pedals or small little pedals off to the side, usually just an octave. The majority of the pipe organs in the British Isles usually just had one manual, one keyboard. And if there were pedals, they were almost invariably coupled to the pedals. Sometimes the pedal division didn't have pipes of their own. There were a lot of English organ builders, strangely enough, that started surfacing during this period. One of them was Abraham Jordan, which apparently was a father-son team that started their own organ building company, and it's believed they developed the swell box as we currently know it. Okay, so just to explain again what a swell box is, you see the blinds on our windows here in the sanctuary. Okay, imagine those are made out of wood, fairly thick, because the idea is to mute sound of pipes that are inside this big wooden box with a roof and everything, to contain a certain section of the organ's pipes. Also made out of very thick wood. Not soundproof, but definitely dampening, because you're looking for that effect. And on the sides and the front of this box are slats that look like the blinds on our windows. And the organist can open and close those using one of these expression pedals down below with their foot while they're playing. They can open and close these slats. And what it does is it creates an effect of the pipes inside this box getting louder and brighter and more brilliant when you open them. And then when you shut them, it gives them sort of like a okay? So literally those blinds go that kind of effect. So while the organist is playing, they can actually control not just the volume but the brilliance of the swell section. Usually there's an entire manual all on its own called the swell section, and it has its own division of stop knobs or buttons or whatever to control their own pipes within the swell box. What's really cool is that the manuals can be coupled. So you can play on the great organ, which is not closed up in a swell box. So the pipes stand up front. Quite often the ones you see up front are part of the pedal division and the great division, and they're unenclosed, so they're full volume, full brilliance. What you hear is what you get. But you can couple the swell section to that keyboard. So while you're playing the great and all that stuff with its full tone, you can control the swell playing through it, which is really neat. As an organist, it is so much fun experimenting with all this stuff. So swell box developed as we know it with the vertical blinds from England. Okay, next one. Organ music from this period. It seems like on mainland Europe, the organ was almost totally ignored. They were still being played in churches, don't get me wrong. It's not like nobody played the organ any longer, that's not true. They were still popular, big cathedrals were still doing masses, and there were still concerts going on and all this kind of stuff. But in terms of developing new organ music, kind of dwindled quite a lot. Why? Because the main focus was suddenly put on the orchestra and the piano. The piano forte exploded during the 1700s, the 18th century, just exploded. From very, very gentle, kind of feeble-sounding earlier pianos, they suddenly became bigger, more expressive, so that the term piano forte actually would mean something. Piano meaning soft, forte meaning loud. So that's why we're starting to see big developments of orchestra and piano. We're also starting to see transcriptions of orchestral music being arranged and rewritten for piano and organ. So a lot of the repertoire coming in for the pipe organ was essentially classical orchestral music that was being transcribed. So pieces by Mozart, which an orchestra would have played, is being transcribed for organists in church to play. English and America suddenly saw an explosion, I would say sort of towards the end of the 1700s, in what are called voluntaries. Now that can be a term that can mean many different things to many different organists. A voluntary is normally a piece that is normally quite bold, quite exciting. It's normally not very long, maybe 2 pages long at the most, 3 to 5 minutes tops, okay? And it can be a march, it can be a trumpet voluntary with a solo trumpet with accompanying keyboard playing, and so on and so forth. They were very popular, not just in churches, but also in secular entertainment. They were often used like between movies, between acts in a play or something. The organist would get up and start playing voluntaries and things. Okay, so this is also where we see secular organ starting to take off. Next one, please. Now come some interesting pictures. These are called chamber organs. Okay, they kind of resemble the Renaissance and early organs. As you can see, still no pedals on these. Very limited stops. As you can see on the sides, there are stop knobs. I see 5, 6, 7. So there's maybe 10 to 14 stops on this instrument, which is actually quite amazing that it fits in that tiny little kist. Okay, this is typical English style chamber organ. They could have been used in small churches, they could have been used in homes, in schools, wherever, because they're highly portable. Bear in mind there's still no electricity, okay? Which means somebody still has to, and they were paid well. Okay, next one. This is an American one. Okay, so America is building organs now too. As you can see, this is 6 stops. You see the 3, 3, 3, but still no pedals. Quite interesting, isn't it? Okay, next. This is a curiosity that became very popular in the 1700s, and believe it or not, a lot of composers who would have normally written pieces for organs started writing for this thing. And what it is, it's called an organ clock. It's a mechanical device. It is actually a clock. And I believe every hour or half hour or something, it would play a really, really cute tune using pipes. It was all cogs and wheels and spring-loaded, so you had to rewind it every morning or every evening. And there were little bellows in there that would create the airflow. And it would have like little rollers or little metallic discs that you could switch and put them in there, and then they would play tunes, kind of like a music box. And this is what it looks like up front. Next one. There you go. Pretty, huh? So it's actually got the little pipes in there and everything. Okay, next one down. This is a reproduction. There are companies still that make them, believe it or not. They are collector's items. This is an actual miniature pipe organ, folks, that works on either a little barrel or drum or a little metal disc with little holes in them to make the tunes. Okay, next one. This is a modern version, so it's not really a reproduction of anything. There's a company that makes them. This is modern. And you can see there's weights, like a grandfather clock. You have to pull the weights and everything, and it plays little tunes. Okay, next. Here gives you an idea of kind of the sideways layout. There's your organist going at it. All mechanical action, remember, there's no electricity yet. When electricity comes around, things change. So your organ has, your console has to be really close to the pipe chambers and the pipes. You can't have long distances. You can't have the organist sitting here and let's say the pipe case is up there. That'll come later. Right now they're usually attached or very close to each other somehow because everything is pulleys and levers and cantilevers and all sorts of things that are linking the action that the organist is using to the pipes. And look at that poor guy there at the back, eh? There's 3 bellows that he needs to push down. So push, and then while they're rising back up, he goes back and pushes that, and then he will have a system of pushing down to provide even wind. Okay, next. This is one in England. This is a typical 17th century church pipe organ in England. They're still around. A lot of them have been updated. They now have pedals, and some of them are now electrified. But essentially, they have maintained the cases and maintained the pipes because they were made in certain ways and they were voiced in certain ways. Okay, this is another thing with all the different styles of organs from the different eras. Different building techniques, different ways of making pipes. Okay, next. This is from Ireland. This is Goldie Chapel in Cork. And this is a refurbished, redone, electrified, see the light? Aha. And I believe pedals were put in, but they kept the old pipes. Look how ornate they are. And this is from Ireland, folks. So I had to throw something like that in there, just for my Irish loved ones. Okay? And now we're going to sing Be Thou My Vision. To the tune Slane, and I believe there is a town or a village in Ireland called Slane. Yes, good. So I got my facts straight. Okay, glasses, here we go. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me save that thou art. Thou my best thought in the day and the night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom, be thou my true word. I ever with thee and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, thine own may I be. Thou Okay. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at some other 18th century music. We're going to kick off with a hymn, Come Thou Almighty King, which was written by an Italian, the tune at least, Felice de Giardini, from the 1700s. And we're going to look at one of the popular orchestral transcriptions for the organ, Trumpet Voluntary by Jeremiah Clarke. Now, Jeremiah Clarke was a Baroque composer, but it was during the 1700s that we see transcriptions starting to appear, so I included that one. So, Come Thou Almighty King. This would have typically been something you would have heard in 1700s churches. Come thou almighty King. I love that little ding at the end there. Someone's phone. Okay. So as you can hear, still very light, very cheerful music from the Baroque period, carrying over into classical. All right, so now we are going into the 19th century. Okay, this is the time of Sturm und Drang. Okay. Some people sort of have a feeling it might have started amongst the Germanic people, this movement. Sturm und Drang, drama, darkness, clouds, drama. The elf king coming to kidnap kids and take them away. The wicked, evil fairies from the Green Isle. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at people starting to go back into the past and become inspired by all the mysteries and the mysticism and stuff from the past. Operas are starting to be written. Der Erlkönig, the elf king, is starting to become popular amongst the Germanic people. There were pieces written about it. We're looking at things like you know, the wedding march, for example, from Mendelssohn, comes from the king of the fairies, Oberon, becoming married. And he meets his subjects. Actually, it's got nothing to do with church, it's got nothing to do with Christianity either. But it's very popular in Christian churches when couples get married, they've taken their vows and they've been presented to the congregation, and down the aisle they go. Okay? That actually comes from the elf king, the fairy king, Oberon, being married, I assume, to Titania, who was the fairy queen. So we're looking at things like that. We're looking at mythology and stories coming through. Global interest in the organ exploded during this period. Absolutely blew out of proportion. If the 1700s were kind of like, okay, well, you know, you're caught on the equator with the doldrums, you know, there's really no airflow, so your ship just kind of, okay, we're sailing on the same waters of other past periods. This time in music history was utterly different. In fact, there was more happening with the pipe organ then than even today. Okay, today we're kind of heading towards the doldrums again. But the 1900s, the Romantic period, actually no, it's 1800s, sorry, it's 19th century. Global interest, not just Europe, not just England, everywhere. The colonies, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, India, with the British there. You will not believe the beautiful cathedrals and pipe organs in India, in China, in Hong Kong, everywhere. The Spanish and Portuguese-speaking nations, they always had organs. They always had pipe organs. But again, here it is just exploding all of a sudden in Latin America, South America, Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, Portugal, Spain, you name it. Italy, just explosion of music. The French just went nuts. The size of the instruments became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. More powerful, more dynamic ability. So we're starting to look at massive cathedral pipe organs with 4, 5, 6 manuals, able to play pianissimo with softest little pipes that you can, softest toned pipes that you can hardly hear them, to great loud, massive, what they call tutti, full organ, where all the stops are pulled out. The French developed some of the most powerful trumpet and bombard and tuba stops imaginable. Wagner invented a whole different class of brass instruments to be used in his operas. They were a hybrid class. They were sort of half trumpet, half French horn, half everything. And he had a whole section of them, up to 6, 7, 8 of them, sometimes playing in 4, 5-part harmonies to create chords that sounded very threatening, very powerful, very in your face. Well, the French developed that in the brass reed stops. Dynamic abilities increased immensely. Imitative orchestral stops started becoming more and more. In the past, you always had stops that said flute and kind of sounded fluty. You had stops that said oboe, or as they would use the French term, hautbois. And, you draw it and, okay, it sounds kind of oboe-y. Okay, they were kind of, in the 19th century, they really started sounding more and more and more like their orchestral counterparts on purpose. Okay, because more and more and more symphonic music was being written for the organs too. So they had to rise to the occasion. They couldn't still be stuck in the Baroque era with no pedals and okay. They had to rise to the occasion and meet the demands that were being met by the orchestras, because the orchestras were growing. We're starting to look at 35 to 40-member big symphony orchestras doing Mendelssohn and the big opera orchestras and so on, playing for Wagner and all this kind of stuff, Puccini. So we're seeing big, big, big sounds of huge exotic capability. So the organs met the challenges too. A lot of orchestral transcriptions were still happening. So we're starting to see things like Ride of the Valkyries by Wagner being transcribed for pipe organ too. And I do have a copy of it, and it is really hard to play. I will need at least a month to master that. Okay, rise of powerful symphonic organ. So within the romantic organ, you had little subcategories. One was called the symphonic organ. That is the one that could sound like an orchestra, could sound like a gigantic, massive pipe organ too, with trumpets and horn sounds. French horn stops became very popular. We're seeing the rise of stops like clarinet, oboe, bassoon, English horn. The string stops, okay, they're all pipe organs. To get a string tone from a pipe, it has to be made out of metal usually, and it has to be very narrow scale. Okay, always remember the scale or the thickness of the pipe will alter the timbre as well. So the fatter and bigger the pipe, the more fluty and round it sounds. The narrower it is, the more stringy it sounds with very strong upper harmonics. So you'll get things like as the scale of the pipes change. So we're seeing more and more and more string stops. This is the time, especially, it was probably invented earlier, but we're seeing more and more of what they call the Celeste stops. This organ has 3 Celeste stops. The way they work is that there are 2 rows of very narrow stringy pipes. One is in tune like normal with the rest of the organ, and the other one is slightly out of tune on purpose. And the reason for that is that it will create this undulating slight vibrato. So you get voix celeste, you get unda maris, which means waves of the sea, voix celeste. Okay, vox angelica is another one. And you get this ra, 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 ra effect when one pipe is slightly out of tune with the other. And it's done on purpose. Many new divisions are being created. Oftentimes they're all in their own swell boxes. You don't just have a swell division anymore. This is where we see what's called the choir organ. In the past, the positif that was behind the organ. If you looked at the pipe case of earlier organs, you have the main case and then a small little case sticking out from the balcony. When the organ is sat between them, that small little section was actually behind the organist, and it was called rück positif, back positive, or simply positif. But now we're seeing that slowly disappear. Not entirely. The French and the Germans still kept them, but especially amongst British organs, we're seeing the choir organ, which replaces the positive, and it's in its own swell box with its shutters and everything. We're seeing, okay, next. Okay, I don't know if I actually put it in. I thought I did. We're seeing the organs starting to be divided because this is the electricity has now arrived. So now we're seeing big support from electricity and wiring. So now you have bigger capabilities. You can have the organist sitting there with used to be getting all excited because this is fascinating stuff. You will have the main case up on the balcony or up front, And then you will have your divisions in their own cases and in their own boxes all over the place. Okay, so now you're looking at capability of getting sounds from all over, not just up front, from the main case. People will be sitting and they'll hear the main organ, and all of a sudden they'll hear a trumpet sounding way at the other end. Okay, big cathedrals in Europe and especially Britain are very good for that. I don't know if you remember the old Crystal Cathedral. Apparently it changed hands, so things have changed now. There's no Robert Schuller, Hour of Power, and all that kind of stuff anymore. But that organ that they had in the Crystal Cathedral was called the Hazel. Oh, I don't know her surname, but it was a senior who bequeathed a whole lot of money to the Crystal Cathedral to build this enormous pipe organ. It was built by 2 companies. And you had the main case with the orchestra and the choir. And apparently the cathedral was shaped like a big star. And in the little corners of the star, there were clusters of pipes, usually trumpets and things like that, that could be played. So it would sound like an angel herald's trumpet playing way over at the other end of the building. So we're starting to see a lot of that. Okay, Aristide Cavaillé-Coll. He was not even a musician, much less an organist at all. He was a technician, he was an engineer, and he was very fascinated in sound and manipulating sound. And he got into pipe organ building in Paris, France. And he started developing what is now called the French Romantic organ, with its brilliant loud trumpets and things like that. He started to introduce what's called a balanced expression. So it would work slower. It was heavier weight on the foot. And that was done on purpose so that you wouldn't have suddenly a big sound instantly. The shades and everything would open up slower on purpose and shut slower, so that you wouldn't have little accidents and accidentally making a wow. If that makes any sense to you. You know, it's so easy to hit that swell pedal and make a big mistake. We're starting to look at Cavaillé-Coll introducing what's called overblown stops. That's when you take a certain pipe that would speak under a certain wind pressure, very important, and he would double the wind pressure. Now, if you take a recorder and you blow gently into it like you're supposed to, and then suddenly you blow really hard, it'll shoot up the octave because you've overblown it. But it'll sound 3 times louder than it normally would. So he was manipulating this. He was putting pipes under twice as much pressure from the wind, and the pipes were blowing up an octave, and they were really powerful and loud. We're seeing what's called harmonic stops. That was popular with some of these trumpets and flutes. You would drill a hole right in the middle of the pipe, and then you would overblow it. And then it would sound up the octave, and it would sound louder too. I wonder what I did with this. Okay. Special class of pipes that came from France during that period. Powerful trumpets and bombard, which is a kind of a tuba stop. I mentioned that before. English builders really started exploding during this time. Pedals were now introduced, and actually it was the English who introduced what's called the concave radiating pedals. Before that, all the European and all the other pipe organs had straight pedals that were flat. Now, when you start getting to the extreme outer edges of your pedal board, it becomes really hard because you sort of have to really manipulate that foot to hit them accurately because it's all flat. But it was the English who came out with a concave so that it was more ergonomic. So with the curving of your knees and your foot, it was natural. The pedals curved with it. And concave, meaning they gathered at the back and then concaved out like a Chinese fan. Okay, so it made playing so much easier, much more accurate, You could do some amazing things with crossover of feet. Okay, there's techniques of playing. You always have to use your toes and your heels as your measuring guides. So when you do a crossover, you play this pedal and then you have to slide that foot over, use your heel to gauge the next one up top. So now we're seeing a lot of advanced pedal playing where you cross over feet. So it's kind of like dance, over the pedals, crossing your feet over. Thanks to the radiating pedals. Okay, so Hope Jones, let's go back to the next one, sorry Kelly, started introducing a whole different class of pipes. He invented he was British, especially reeds, which spoke on very heavy wind pressure. Now, in order to do this, you have to have multiple fans, you have to have multiple air reservoirs, and you have to have multiple wind chests, because you can't have the entire organ speaking on that heavy wind pressure. Otherwise, everything gets messed up. So he would have special wind chests with their own special ducts and their special everything just for those. So he would have powerful tuba and trombone and trumpet stops all sitting on this heavy wind chest, and the rest of the organs would be on their own regular wind pressures. He also created something called a diaphone, which instead of a normal reed instrument, which is a vibrator striking a slot, kind of like a clarinet or a saxophone. So all the other reed stops like oboe, clarinet, trombone, trumpet, is a brass vibrator slapping against a cup-shaped opening, and then this goes through the pipe and out through the flange up top. Diaphone was a round thing that was spring-loaded and would vibrate and slap against a hole. So we do that. It was very loud. It could fill an entire cathedral with the most powerful sound because of this slapping circle. Okay, next. Electricity, there we go. Placing of organ cases, the console could go anywhere now. The cases could be placed anywhere. You could have divided cases, which you see a lot in English cathedrals in particular. You see the pipe organ with the cases split in half facing each other up front. And then you will have the choirs split in half facing each other across the aisle. So you're having divided organs. You could have that. You could have what's called an ethereal or an echo section, which is way up in the dome, high up above, so it's very soft. It sort of comes from heaven. Or you could have something way at the back at the top near the ceiling, like a powerful trumpet. So it sounds like Gabriel and his host are coming to get you. Okay. There we go, placed in various parts of large buildings. Organ chests were often divided based on wind pressures. I already mentioned that. You can't have all the divisions and all the pipes on the same wind pressure. You have to decide, is this organ going to have multiple wind pressures or not? Okay, earlier pipe organs did not. They all spoke on the same wind pressure, which was quite gentle. That's why people still love the Baroque organ, because it was all gentle wind. So the tone was never forced, never overpowering. But during the 19th century, we're seeing special wooden organ cases with specific pipes on top that only speak under heavy wind pressure. Consoles became bigger and bigger and bigger. This is called an organ console. Okay, we're seeing more and more and more manuals. We're seeing more and more and more little buttons, and more stops, and more flickering, blinking lights and things. So now it's starting to look like a space shuttle. Okay. Increasing complex features and all sorts of expression pedals, because all these divisions are in their own special little swell boxes with their own special shades and everything. So you could have multiple things happening there all at once. Now organists have to be like a highly gifted octopus. Okay, next. This is the pipe organ at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. It was built by Aristide Cavecol, one of the larger endeavors of his. He built everything from small little 2-manual 20-stop pipe organs for little village churches to these humongous cathedral pipe organs, very ornate. Notice again, all the pipes are in a row. on the same plane. This is typical for French organs. Not all of them are like that, but the majority of them are on a flat plane with what's called towers. Main tower features, quite often two big ones on the outer end and then other stuff in the middle. These pipes actually do play. They're from a stop on the great organ, the main organ, keyboard. They're called montre, and montre in French means to show. And I don't know if you can see it, but along the bottom, underneath the montre pipes, you see other pipes jutting out, straight out, horizontally. Can you see that? Sort of, I'm sorry if people on the internet can't see this, but you see here, there's a row here, there's some here, and all along the bottom here. Those are special trumpet stops. Okay, they're called trompette en chamade. And en chamade simply means that it's shown out like that. I need to find out the real translation of that word. But when you're sitting at the organ, and you will see that it says trompette en chamade, that's what it is. They're jutting out into the congregation. So you have that coming right over your heads. Okay, next one. This is also a French romantic organ in a big cathedral. Saint-Sulpice. Saint-Sulpice in Paris. Okay, it's also a Cavecol wonder. This one is divided into two with a récit jutting out front where the clock is. So they kept the old classical formation. The organist is sandwiched between them. They climb up a flight of stairs, and then they sit like this. The récit is behind the organist, and the main case is up front. A very powerful, beautiful organ. Huge echo in these buildings. 6, 7, 9, 10 second reverberations. Perfect for organ playing. Next. That is a typical French console. Okay, this one's 5 manuals with pedals. The French, particularly in the 1800s onwards, loved to have their draw stops in this amphitheater type layout. It was really the English who started to develop the diamond shape with the stop knobs. The French preferred it laid out like this, and the theater organ followed that model of a horseshoe shape. Okay, so this is typical 1800s French pipe organ. Next, there's Saint Owen. Sort of like Owen, but instead of a W, it's a U. Saint Owen in Paris. There's some beautiful recordings of concerts done on this organ on YouTube. Okay, next. This is a typical British organ from that period. Okay, as you can see, it's standing on what's called the rood screen. The rood screen separated the choir section with the high altar from the rest of the congregation. There was this separation of the two with an arch in the middle. Quite often you couldn't even see the choir. Okay, because they're sitting facing either side of the aisle, facing each other behind the rood screen, so you can't even see them sometimes. Later on, they would have the rood screen, so it wasn't a solid wall, but rather like a grill, so you could still see the choir. And quite often, the pipe organ would be sitting on top of the screen, and it would have 2 facades. One side facing the choir and the high altar, the other side facing the congregation. I believe this is actually looking at the congregation. The choir would be behind there. The organist would be up on the screen somewhere, up on this wall. The console would be up there, so he or she could look down at the music director, and the choir would be on the other side of this. Okay, next. I think that organ is nicknamed the Owl, because it looks like eyes, right? Okay, next one. This is a close-up detail of the pipe organ from Westminster Abbey. Okay, this is the Queen's Church, Westminster Abbey. There are 2 cases like this, and they face each other. So this is the classical. there is a rood screen made out of stone, carved with saints and all sorts of things on it, with an arch. The choir sits one side. The organist sits on top of this wall. The wall is actually quite wide. I believe it's probably from the pulpit to the wall. That's how wide the wall is. So the organist actually does sit on the wall, can look either side at the congregation or the choir and the director. And there are two cases like this facing each other, with the organist sandwiched in between the two. And then there's another section called the choir organ, which is down lower, behind, and faces the choir. So it's really close to the choir. Very ornate. The pipes are actually painted. They don't normally appear that dark blue. Beautiful angels, all sorts of detail. Next. Another common thing with Victorian organs. So this is late Romantic period, coming into the early 20th century, is painting the pipes. Okay, quite often they would have some of the most amazing colors and details. Some of them could be quite gaudy. Some of them could be like, oh, that is just way overdone. But some of them are kind of cute. This is one of the more ornate ones. There's another one that we can look at next. This is much closer up, but look at the detail. Look how they painted the lip of the pipes. You know, the lip either side before you get to the openings. Those are called lips. Okay, look at all the fine detail. You think how many pipes would be up front like that. Okay. Pipe painting still carries on today. They take on a different twist. I actually saw on the internet, I was not going to add it, pipes with like Disney characters on them and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, that's too much. Okay, let's go next. Typical pieces from that period. I'm going to do postlude in D. Voluntaries and what they call preludes and postludes for church services and stuff just blossomed. Okay, and they were often quite big, quite epic, quite large sounding, kind of like opera music. This is one of them. And then a typical Romantic period hymn, O Servants of God. Now, as you can see, it would be impossible to do all those fancy pedal moves on a, well, not impossible, it would take a lot of work on a flat pedal board, trust me. Okay, oh servants of God. O servants of God, your Master proclaim, and publish abroad that wonderful name, the name of victorious of Jesus extol, whose reign ever glorious shall rule over all. God rules from on high, almighty to save, yet ever is nigh whose presence we have. The great congregation God's triumph shall see, ascribing salvation to Jesus our King. Salvation to God who sits on the throne. Let all cry aloud and honor the Son. The praises of Jesus the angels proclaim, fall down on their faces and worship the Lamb. Then let us adore, give God what is right, all glory and power, all wisdom and might, and honor and blessing with angels above, and thanks never ceasing, and infinite love. So as you can hear, bigger sounds, more bold, a lot more trumpet sounds. In the past, trumpet would usually be used as a solo stop. Now we're seeing it used as what's called a chorus stop. Okay, so the function of the trumpet stop did change over time. Still used as solo, but now it's getting bold. Now they're playing chords and harmonies and full chorus with brilliant trumpet and tuba stops. 20th century, here we go. Boy, some interesting developments there. After the time of the great romantic organ, there was a feeling that, okay, enough's enough, guys. Whew. Okay, these organs are getting way too big. They're dominating the scene. Orchestras were still the main focus now, but now we're starting to see a more scholarly approach to the organ, and people are starting to see the virtue of going back to the Baroque style. Okay, the tone was what they consider purer, lighter, unforced, gentler. You could still fill a big building with sound, but without these heavy pressure grand trumpets and bombards and tubas and stuff. Don't get me wrong, those organs didn't disappear. They were still there. They're still there to this very day. Okay, 19th century pipe organs are still there, and they're still as popular as ever. But there was sort of like a scholarly, more, you know, let's put our heads together and reason group that was developing, and they created what was called the Neo-Baroque organ. So it electrified, full pedals, full stop knobs, everything, all the benefits of the modern age, but they were built in a style, imitated and sounded like Baroque organs. Very light, very gentle, nothing was forced. Even if you pulled out all the stops, you got this full grand pipe organ sound. It was different from the big 19th century French and British and German. Some of the Germans were building powerful organs during the Romantic period too. One of the famous composers during that time was Joseph Reinberger. So, those organs still exist to this day. In fact, there is a company in Austria called Rieger Organ Builders, and they still build massive, massive, massive Romantic style organs. In fact, I wish I could remember the name of this cathedral in Hungary, because I've got a Hungarian auntie here. There's this gigantic Rieger pipe organ in a big cathedral in Hungary. I believe it is in Budapest, actually. Okay, so now we're going back to a revival of the older Baroque style. We're starting to see people studying even the older organs like the Renaissance, the portative organs, the portable portative organs that were on a neck strap and all that kind of stuff. They're looking at the older style of voicing the pipes, which was different, the timbres that they produced, and even the different tunings and temperaments that were used in earlier periods. Modern builders are experimenting with. I remember watching a program from Nebraska. Nebraska apparently is very musical with many, many pipe organs and lots of really excellent organists and organ builders. There's a company called Presbyterian Organ Builders from Nebraska, and they were building a new pipe organ for this congregation in Nebraska. And this congregation wanted an instrument that sounded like it came from the 1800s France. So Bedient and a group of his technicians actually flew to France and went to old cathedrals and churches that still have these old 16 and 1700 French pipe organs. They played them, they studied them, they recorded the sounds, everything. They were allowed to go into the cases and go behind the scenes and look at the pipes, look how they were made, the materials that were used, the thickness of the walls of the pipes, which has a huge influence. The thicker the walls of the pipes, the more muted and muffled the fall. But the thinner, the more brighter it sounds. They did everything. The reeds, the trumpet stops were very particular on these old French organs. They imitated everything. They even used the tuning system that was used. Modernized it a little because it has to be for a modern church, right? In the earlier tuning systems, it became really hard to play in the very remote keys. The more flats and sharps your key was, the more out of tune the instrument sounded. There's also a return to what's called the tracker action. Remember that picture I showed you of the organist sitting there playing with the guy behind with the bellows? All those levers, cantilevers and strings and things pulling and carrying on so that it can open up the little flaps underneath the pipes to allow the wind in. That is all called tracker action. That's called trackers. Okay? So we're seeing a return to this. So pipe organ builders are now starting to move away from electric action, and they're going back to tracker action. Apparently there is a feeling that the touch of the organist can affect the way the organ sounds. In some ways, when you have tracker action. When it's electric or electronic action, it doesn't matter what touch and technique the organist is using, it still sounds the same. So they're starting to go back to the older styles. Okay, next. One downfall of the 20th century is that some building companies around the world, very prominent in America, I hate to say it, but even our beloved Cassaval Frères pipe organs, which is a huge organ company of our own in Quebec, indulged themselves in this very strange, interesting thing. They're called unit organs, okay? And a lot of smaller congregations, like I said before, always want a pipe organ because that's just the thing to have. If you have a church or a kirk or an église or whatever, or a basilica, whatever, you have to have your pipe organ. It's just part and parcel, right? I mean, how on earth can you have Christmas without a Christmas tree, for goodness sake? So they had to have their pipe organ. So many builders came up with a cheap way to enable smaller congregations with limited funds to be able to have their beloved pipe organ. They are not full big pipe organs like we know them, with 30, 40, 50 stops. And each one has its own row of pipes, and it can take up the entire back balcony over there. So let's say here in our medium-sized sanctuary, we wanted a little pipe organ sort of in the corner up there somewhere. We would probably go for a unit organ or a semi-unit organ. So what happens is that they would have a row of pipes that was the full 5 octaves of the keyboard, plus an octave above it and an octave below it. So now it's a 7-octave row of pipes. So now you can have low pedal pipes borrowing from that one row of pipes. And you can have higher, smaller pitched pipes coupled with it. So it can end up sounding like you have drawn 3 or 4 stops. Okay? But actually you've drawn it all from one row of pipes. So that was one way to create a cheap alternative, was to have 4, 5, 6 rows of pipes and all borrowing from each other. Also, arrival of digital period, a rise of hybrid organ. This is digital organ. This isn't a real pipe organ. So now you have hybrids. You have hybrid between digital and real pipes as well. Gives rise to greater flexibility. You can do experimental things with sounds and combinations between real pipes and digitals. Unfortunately, one feature with the rise of contemporary music is that the organ started to fall out of favor. Okay, you can't have a big Hillsong church with a 10-piece band and a group of professional singers and have a pipe organ. Right? It just doesn't fit the genre. It doesn't fit the style. So, big question mark, what's the future? So we actually don't know. There are still organ building companies today. As long as you have traditional congregations and so on and so forth, concert halls, schools, whatever, you will always have a demand for pipe organ, but they are slowly falling out of favor. We're seeing things like Anglican churches, Presbyterian churches, Methodist churches, even Roman Catholic, starting to move into the contemporary to appeal to the millennials and so on and so forth. But the millennials are a mixed bucket of people too. Don't think they all like Hillsong and that they all like the modern contemporary stuff either. Some of them would like to come to church and experience church like Grandma and Grandpa did. So it's an iffy thing, what the future holds. Okay, next. This is a typical, what I would consider a typical modern pipe organ in a typical congregation of the 1900s into now. Simple, straightforward, would I say plain? Well, compared to those gigantic cathedral organs, well, yeah. But that's what you would typically encounter. See, they've got the trumpet on Shabbat up top. Look at the brass trumpets jutting out up top there. Okay, next. This is a little more fancy with some lighting effects and different colors. Somewhat bigger organ. It's sort of this size with 3 manuals and everything. Next. Okay, now we're starting to get into funky designs. Okay, so now we're looking at uneven, unbalanced, done on purpose. It's kind of Art Nouveau, kind of modern style. Different heights, different sizes in there. This looks like, it could be a church. Yeah, that could be choir. People would sit in those chairs. There's a piano off to the side. Next one. Okay, we go back to that one, Kelly, sorry. If you can see along the bottom, you see these things with the slats. Those are probably swell shades too. So you probably have pipes behind that being controlled by swell shades. Next. That is a very avant-garde design. Okay, it's questionable whether those shiny things you see there right now are actually operational pipes. I doubt it. The real plain pipes are probably behind that because they're just sort of suspended in midair. Okay, next. Another very modern looking one with fancy lighting effects coming from behind and even on the organ case. Look at that. Look at the glowing orange streaks. Okay, next. This is a Cassavant, remember, our French-Canadian organ company. Builds a lot of organs around the world. This is in a shopping mall in Japan. The Asians apparently are crazy over pipe organs, and they are consuming them like crazy. This is a huge organ. Look at the fancy design. It kind of looks like a peacock feather design up top there, right? Those are trumpets. But look how big it is. It's 2 balconies there to the side. And you've got this massive pipe organ. Well done, Cassavant. Okay, next. Theater organ, Wurlitzer, typical. See, they adopted the horseshoe design. Okay, next. We need to wrap this up, it's getting kind of late. Okay, now we're going to look at the music. I have chosen Shine, Jesus, Shine, which is a popular Baptist song. Works with the organ. And then a fanfare on Truro, which is Christ is Alive, that I arranged for organ quite a while back. Okay. Ooh. I need my glasses.
Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Lord, I come to your awesome presence, from the shadows into your radiance. By your blood I may enter your brightness. Search me, try me, consume all my darkness. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. As we gaze on your kingly brightness, so our faces display your likeness, ever changing from glory to glory. Mirrored here, may our lives tell your story. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze,
Okay, there we go. That was my little arrangement of Christ is Alive. Longer program, we started later, sorry about that. And of course I ended up babbling way too much. Our next session, Thursday the 7th of April, we're not going to have one on the 31st. Okay, the 31st is our organ piano recital for peace with Christine Oliver. So instead of a Worship Matters, we're going to have a concert on the 31st of March. So the next one will be shifted to April the 7th. We're starting to look at how does the pipe organ work. So I'm going to go into more detail of some of the stuff that I was talking about right now, overblowing stops, pedals, blah, blah, blah. You pull this, you push that. I'll probably need to shift the organ a little more so you can actually watch and see what I'm doing. Okay. So that is Thursday the 7th at 11 p.m. Thank you so much. And God bless. AM, yes. I put PM again. Yeah, no, it's AM. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. A lot of stuff on my mind. I sort of rushed through it for some reason. Yes, it's 11 a.m. in the morning, not midnight. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Did they write music just for the pedals?
Yes. Yes, organ music proper has 3 staves, 2 for the hands, and then 1 for the pedals. Yeah, you can actually see here with the arrangement I did, is that real organ music has 3 staves. So the pedal section actually have its own. So, it's the 2 hands and then pedal.
And the pedal,
Yeah, and it has its own.
its own thing. Okay, so do they sometimes, like those organs are so big, would they have 2 organists at the same time? Like,
You know what? There are pieces for 2 organists.
so big.
Not just that way. There are some cathedrals and concert halls that have 2 consoles. Sometimes they will do it that way, and one organist will sit at one console and the other one at the other one.
Okay, and do they clean the pipes?
Oh, yes. Yes, maintenance is done, not on a monthly basis. I'd say maybe twice a year at least. Spring and fall in particular. Those are times where pipe organs really go out of tune. Something frantic because of the fluctuation in temperatures and stuff.
I was just going to say if they were affected by
Yes, they are. So every effort is made to make sure that the sanctuary and the pipe organ is kept in as constant as possible, including the air that gets sucked through the fans to blow through the pipes needs to be constant. You can't have 2 different temperatures there either. Yeah. Usually the technician that tunes them will clean at the same time. You'll usually have 2 or 3 people coming in. Things like vacuum cleaners with soft brush to go between the pipes and stuff is totally within. Oh yes, they go inside the case. Oh yeah. You will see. Well, they range from this tall to 36 feet. But generally the case is kept as clean as possible so no stuff goes in there. But occasionally disasters happen, like a bird. They slip into the building and actually build a nest in the pipes. That has happened before. Yeah. And then Sunday morning, boom,